I'm a well-known designer. I create simple but elegant dresses for wealthy women, investing all my time and energy into my work. At 35, I live alone in a spacious studio. My furniture consists only of a large, comfortable bed and a small table where I enjoy coffee and croissants in the morning. The rest of the space is taken up by a large table where I spread out fabric samples and my beloved sewing machine, my faithful companion. It's almost my only companion, as I have little time to socialize due to the abundance of orders for clothes from various well-known brands. I've never had a family, although I almost got married once. I sigh and put aside the folder of samples. My studio is located in the attic of a high-rise building in an elite neighborhood of the city. The windows are uncovered to let in as much light as possible during the day. I get up, tie the belt of my white silk robe, and go to the window. Beyond the glass, the city at night glows with golden lights. In the distance, the bay shines with lanterns lining the main avenue like sparkling beads. During the day, I don't feel my loneliness. I'm absorbed in looking for new ideas, designing, dealing with work issues, contacting clients, and selecting fabrics. Work has always been a joy for me, making me feel alive and full of energy. Even routine doesn't bore me. Years of experience have taught me when to let go of one task and move on to another. But the nights bring a different feeling. The shining city at my feet makes me acutely aware of my loneliness. Completely alone, I feel like an invisible comet flying through forgotten cosmic space, with no one in the world to warm my frozen heart. I sigh again and shift my gaze from the distant city to my reflection in the glass. Dark, curly locks frame my face. Round reading glasses suit me well. My bright blue eyes, inherited from my mother, have hardly any crow's feet around them. I'm still as beautiful as I was in my youth. Many people are surprised when they hear my age. They can't believe I'm over 28. However, I believe that people compliment me out of kindness. Looking at the reflection in my eyes, I see the weight of years of loneliness. Deep down, I feel like an old woman. At first, I tried to fight this feeling. I would put on a long black dress and wander around the bright, expensive shop windows, or go to a noisy bar and order lemonade. I would sit for a long time, listening to the voices of the local singers, remembering when I used to go for walks with Javier. My fiancé loved live music, and we often went to bars to listen to it. I remember his animated face, his brown eyes full of love and tenderness. People would come up to introduce themselves, but each time I would just shake my head in response. Then I would return home with an even greater emptiness inside me. At some point, these walks became so unbearable that I stopped going out at night. I would work late into the night and then watch black and white movies, read or scribble lines in my sketchbook. I ran a hand through my hair to clear away the memories and turned away from the window. I looked at the wall clock, a gift from a familiar designer, Hugo Martinez. The black and white dial, designed in a strict style, showed 10 minutes to 10. Soon, they would call me again. It all started about 7 years ago, a few months after my failed marriage. I still couldn't recover. I cried bitterly every day, but the tears never stopped. I grieved for Javier, who disappeared unexpectedly on the day we were due to get married. My older sister, Mercedes, took me in. She and her husband helped me both morally and financially. I spent the whole day lying in a small room under the roof, staring at the floral pattern on the old wallpaper. That's when it happened for the first time. Night was approaching. The room was dark, but I didn't want to turn on the light. I lay there, staring into the darkness with unfocused eyes, while fragmented images from the past immediately appeared and disappeared in my memory. I remembered those times when Javier and I laughed until we cried, when we spent endless nights discussing our dreams and plans for the future. Every moment was etched in my memory. The first meeting in a cozy cafe when he was nervously trying to make a good impression. Long walks in the park hand in hand exchanging tender words. Evenings by the fire when time seemed to stand still and only the two of us existed in the world. I remembered his promises of love and devotion, his tender words and affectionate touches. But where were those promises now? Where was this love that was supposed to last forever? It was then, dying of sadness, that I heard the chiming of the old family clock in the living room. The clock struck 10 o'clock. At the same moment, the room was illuminated by a cold bluish light. My cell phone screen lit up. Indifferently, I turned my head and looked at the display, an incoming call in silent mode. I always kept the sound off because I had no desire to talk to anyone, to hear how sorry they felt for me, and to hear assurances that time would heal all wounds. The call came from an unknown number. I looked at the numbers for a long time. The number ended in 49. By an absurd coincidence, these numbers meant a lot to Javier and me. 49, San Martin Street. That was the address of the house we bought shortly before our failed marriage. A tear rolled silently down my cheek. The call ended, but a moment later the same numbers appeared on the display. Someone really wanted to talk to me. Unconsciously, I reached out for the cell phone. "Hello," I answered softly, feeling my heartbeat accelerate. However, the only answer I received was silence. The following evening at exactly 10 hours, the same thing happened again. The call came from a different number, but the digits 49 were still present. I pressed the answer button, but again there was silence on the other end. I thought I could hear faint, intermittent breathing, but I couldn't be sure. Since then, every day at exactly 10 a.m., I received a call on my cell phone from an unknown number, and each time there was only an insistent silence on the other end. I told my sister about the calls, and she advised me to contact the police. However, I didn't do it. I didn't know why, but these daily calls calmed me down and filled me with a little hope. 7 years have passed since then. I became a well-known designer, living in the heart of a big city, but I continued to wait for the call from the unknown number with the digits 49 every day. I felt that the universe was sending me support and love in a strange way. And today, at exactly 10 a.m., the phone rang again. Instinctively, I put the phone to my ear and listened to the symbolic silence for a minute. "Good night to you too," I thought, and pressed the end call button. I was about to put the phone on the bedside table and go to sleep when it vibrated again in my hand. This time, the number was very familiar. Hugo's name appeared on the display. We had worked together on a collection about 5 years ago. It was then that he gave me the watch. I'd known that Hugo loved me for a long time, but I'd always turned down his invitations, insisting on a purely professional relationship. It's strange that he's calling so late, I thought as I pressed the green button. "Bill, darling, how are you?" came Hugo's friendly voice over the phone. "From here. I'm fine." "Why are you calling so late?" I asked. "Don't worry, I'm not calling to ask you on a date." Hugo laughed, easing my heart. It was always uncomfortable to turn Hugo down. He was a wonderful person and a great friend who supported me on my professional journey, but I couldn't help it. For me, Hugo was and always would be just a friend. "Listen to what I have to say," exclaimed Hugo. "My manager just called. We've been invited to a big business conference in the capital. Everyone will be there, you understand, everyone. An opportunity like this comes along once in a decade. It's an excellent chance to promote our new collections, attract prestigious clients, and enter the international market. Isabella, I don't hear any applause in our honor." I've really lost the ability to speak. "Hugo, I don't even know what to say. What if I can't handle it?" There was a disgruntled grumble on the other end of the line. "How can you not cope? You're a professional." "Where else would we find someone like you? You'll rock the collection presentation. It'll be a piece of cake. I have no doubts about you." I smiled gratefully. Hugo always knew how to support me. "But how did you manage that?" I asked. "For Hugo Martinez, nothing is impossible," laughed his old friend and wished me a good night. I lay down in bed, but of course, sleep eluded me. I had long dreamed of being recognized in Europe, but I never thought Hugo would be able to make it happen. The next few weeks were spent in active preparation. There was a lot to do. At the time of Hugo's call, the collection was still at the sketch stage, so I had to quickly find fabric samples, go shopping, and sew patterns. By the beginning of May, everything was ready, and all that remained was to polish the presentation with which I planned to address wealthy compatriots and European businessmen. Hugo sent the tickets by email. I thought for a long time about what to wear to the conference, deciding that the outfit should be in sober tones, but contain some bold and memorable element. "Why don't you wear a hat?" suggested Hugo on the phone, and an image immediately flashed through my mind. A light, fitted suit, hiding a slightly protruding belly, with a thin, knitted turtleneck underneath, and on his head a huge pink hat and matching candy-colored shoes. Hugo approved of the image. He himself decided to show up at the conference in a mint-colored shirt that highlighted his tan, light pants, and a vest. "We certainly won't go unnoticed," laughed Hugo on the phone, and I agreed with him. The flight lasted an hour. Hugo and I sat in different parts of the plane. He dozed off while I went over the materials for the presentation one more time. I was very nervous, feeling my palms sweat distinctly. So much depended on this conference. My prospects, the opportunity to fulfill a long-held dream, but I couldn't imagine how significant this business meeting would become for me. I remembered how yesterday, at exactly 10 o'clock, the phone rang again. I picked up the receiver and, unexpectedly to myself, quickly said, "Tomorrow my dream will come true." For a moment, I thought I would finally get an answer, but no. The line remained silent. However, I felt as if I heard a silent sigh. Before landing, I dozed off for about 10 minutes and had a strange dream. I was walking down the street in a pink hat, the sun shining brightly. Suddenly, I remembered the conference. I need to call Hugo urgently, I thought. I looked in my bag for my phone, but it wasn't there. My face was covered in sweat. Suddenly, a furious wind came up, ripping my hat off my head and blowing it away in an instant. I became desperate. The street quickly darkened. People moved in different directions while I stood perplexed in place. Suddenly, I heard the ringing of a bell. Exactly 10 chimes. I grabbed my head. I'd never missed a call from an unknown number before. Ahead, I noticed a red telephone box and ran to it. Someone was there. I knocked on the glass and the person turned around. I screamed and covered my mouth with my hand because it was Javier. I opened my eyes abruptly as the plane began to descend. It took me a while to shake off the feeling. The dream had been so vivid that I felt disturbed. Javier rarely appeared in my dreams, and when he did, it was always a vague silhouette. When the plane landed, I was still stuck in the dream. "You look so pale, Bill. Did you have a difficult flight?" Hugo asked, worried. "I'm fine, Hugo. It'll pass soon," I replied. Hugo picked up our luggage and called a cab. I silently thanked him for taking care of everything. I still felt sick. My body was shaking. My hands were trembling. When we arrived at the hotel, Hugo checked us in at reception and called the elevator. He saw me to my room and wished me a good night. "You need to rest well, Belle. Tomorrow is an important day for us. We'll show them who knows fashion and style best. But for now, sleep, sleep, sleep." I smiled weakly and went into my room. It was almost 10:15 on the clock. I took a quick shower and lay down under the fluffy white blanket. At 10:15, the phone was silent. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10, then half an hour. No one called. Towards midnight, I started to cry. It was the first time in years. "Where are you?" I whispered in despair. In the morning, a worried Hugo woke me up. "Belle, are you still asleep? The conference starts in 40 minutes. I hurried to get ready, hiding the dark circles under my eyes with a thick layer of foundation. Fortunately, the hat hid the slight disarray in my hair. The light suit fit me perfectly. I went down to the lobby holding a light briefcase with materials, and Hugo breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank God you're on time." "Just a bit tired," I explained. "I see," Hugo replied. "I've called a cab." We got into the car, which quickly took us to a huge skyscraper with blue windows. "The conference will be here, on the 13th floor," muttered Hugo, consulting a handwritten note in his notebook. "Conference room number 49. I froze in place. Hugo shook his head in disapproval but said nothing. We called the elevator and went down to the hall. A large crowd had already gathered. Renowned designers, distinguished fashion connoisseurs, and entrepreneurs from all over the world. Hugo and I took our seats at the front of the room among the conference participants. For a moment, I got distracted and forgot everything. I was about to speak in front of all these people. I took the presentation script out of my briefcase and immersed myself in it. There was still a lingering restlessness in my soul, but I forced myself to focus on my speech. The room gradually filled up with new people, but I didn't notice. I glanced at the text once to make sure that the rail with samples from my collection was next to the stage. I immediately recognized the bright green feathers on the dresses and the gold glitter of the sequins on the jackets. Tears filled my eyes for a moment. 7 years ago, I wore a radiant gold dress as I made my way to the church where I would marry Javier. I refused to wear the traditional white wedding dress, I chose only gold. It was bold and daring for my hometown, but I didn't care. All I could think about was Javier, eager to become his wife. A luxurious wedding limousine, a sea of flowers, a happy father and the bridesmaids in their elegant outfits. Laughter and congratulations echoed everywhere. This is the happiest day of my life, I thought. How cruelly wrong I was. Hugo squeezed my elbow, snapping me out of my memories. "Belle, you're next," he whispered, and I nodded. I took a deep breath and, hearing my name amid the applause, climbed onto the low stage. Camera shutters clicked everywhere. Camera flashes blinded me. I pulled myself together, scanned the room, and was about to start my presentation when something caught my eye. At that moment, my heart pounded desperately in my chest. My head was spinning. But what was making me so nervous? I looked out into the audience once more and met the intense gaze of brown eyes. That gaze belonged to a single familiar person, and he was the dearest person in my life. I was transported back 7 years. The limousine stopped at the church. The door opened, and I got out of the car in my luxurious gold dress. My sister adjusted my hair, carefully tucking the tail behind my back. I took a deep breath of the warm, transparent air and walked slowly towards the steps. I knew Javier was already there, waiting for me at the altar. My father caught up with me and took my arm. Together, we climbed the wide staircase and stopped at the tall doors. My father blessed me and kissed my forehead. The doors opened. The rest was a blur. I walked into the hall arm in arm with my father. All the faces turned to me, but there was no sign of a smile or joy. What's wrong with them? I thought. They look like they've come for a funeral. And then I heard someone crying. Sitting in the pew closest to the altar was Javier's mother, her shoulders shaking. Everything else I remembered very vaguely. I was told that Javier had disappeared, not returning any calls. Then his phone was switched off completely. I couldn't believe he would leave me. As it turned out, it would have been better if he had. A week later, they reported finding his bloated body in a lake near the town. His relatives couldn't recognize Javier, but the examination proved it was him. All I could remember from those terrible days were the patterns on the wallpaper. It was then that I started drawing dresses, which helped me not to go crazy. And now I was standing in front of hundreds of people waiting for the performance to start, but all I could see were the eyes of my lost loved ones. I forced myself back to the present. "Come on, Belle," I heard Hugo whisper. My dream was at stake, so I took a deep breath and began my presentation. However, my gaze, despite my will, began to wander around the room again. I noticed the man with those same eyes was part of a foreign delegation. In his dark, wavy hair, I noticed a touch of gray. Seeing me looking at him, the man stood up and quickly headed for the exit. "He's leaving now," I panicked. I stumbled and, wobbling, dropped the presentation sheet from my hands. There was a commotion in the front row. Hugo approached the stage to help me. I looked helplessly at him, then shifted my gaze to the man, fearing he would disappear. Hugo came on stage and grabbed my elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "There," I replied, and remained silent. My throat was dry. "Can you continue the performance?" asked Hugo, but I didn't hear him. I looked over his shoulder at the man who was already opening the door, intending to leave the hall. "Wait!" I shouted and ran for the exit. Hugo said something quickly behind me, but I didn't hear. I didn't see the surprised eyes of hundreds of people fixed on me. My pink hat fell off my head onto the floor, but I paid no attention. The man left the hall. "I have to catch up with him," I thought frantically. "He can't be Javier, no, but still, I have to be sure." The man was standing next to the elevator. The doors opened and he entered. I followed him, managing to get into the elevator at the last moment. The man looked down, carefully avoiding my gaze. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I must sound crazy, but you look a lot like someone dear to me who passed away years ago." The man raised his eyes and looked at me. My heart froze. I could have sworn it was Javier standing in front of me. The same tenderness and love shone in his eyes, but now mixed with guilt. "Belle," the man whispered hoarsely. "How I've missed you." With those words, he hugged me tightly. "Where have you been all this time? Why did you leave me?" I whispered through my tears, trembling as I clung to him. "I'll tell you everything," Javier replied softly, running his hand through my hair. The elevator doors opened. "Follow me," Javier whispered. "I have a car around the corner." I nodded and we quickly headed for the exit. On the street, Javier led me to an expensive black car and opened the door for me. I sat in the passenger seat. Javier got behind the wheel and we set off. It still seemed like a dream to me. Javier's hands on the steering wheel, his wrists covered in dark hair, everything seemed unreal. "I saw you in a dream on the plane," I sighed. Nothing else came to mind. "I've seen you in a dream every day for all these years," Javier confessed softly. He parked in a narrow alley and turned to me. "Forgive me, Belle. I couldn't do it any other way." "But why?" I looked at him confused. "I've never told you, but in my youth, I got involved with a criminal group. I wanted easy money," Javier said bitterly. I gasped but forced myself to listen. "You changed everything. I was too afraid that you would leave me if you found out the truth, so I decided to break with the past," Javier continued. "At first, I thought I had succeeded. They didn't demand anything, but a week before the wedding, they came to me with the intention of giving me a task that I really didn't want to do. I knew they wouldn't let it go. Remember when you went to the store to pick up the wedding cake and I told you to take my Jeep? They did something to your car's brakes. So I was very careful and checked everything. I called a mechanic, and while he was fixing the brakes, a plan matured in my mind." I leaned forward. I began to suspect something, but Javier grabbed my hand, asking me not to interrupt him. "You see, I couldn't put you in danger, Belle, so I staged my own death." Unable to stop myself, I started to cry. "But how could you, Javier? How could you? I almost died of grief when I heard you had drowned. I almost went mad. And all these years, why did you leave me for so long? Why didn't you get in touch? All I had to do was hear your voice." I had to hide. "You can't imagine how dangerous they are, Belle. Yes, I was afraid for myself, but above all for you. And I called you every night." I was stunned. "So it was you," I sighed. Javier gently caressed my cheek and nodded. "I thought about you every minute of every hour of every day of mine. I missed you so much, my love." I snuggled against him. "Me too. But why didn't you call yesterday?" "I was on a plane," Javier replied simply. "And I knew I'd finally see you tomorrow." I pulled away from Javier and looked into his eyes. "But why have you stayed away for all these years?" "I've been following your success. When I heard that you were going to take part in the biggest business conference, I suggested that my company become your investor. I really wanted your dream to come true. When she came on stage in her enchanting outfit, I almost went mad with the desire to touch her, but I couldn't go near her. I didn't want to ruin everything by interrupting her performance. I never thought she would notice me in the audience. I was afraid of disrupting your life again. You've come so far. You've become nationally famous. There was no room for me in your life." I shook my head, my eyes filled with tears. "A career could never replace what I've lost. You were always everything to me." "Oh, Belle," Javier murmured, tears rolling down his face. I'd never seen him cry before. I held him, feeling his body shake with sobs. A forgotten feeling resurfaced. I wanted to take care of him again, to soothe and comfort his sorrows. "What will become of us now?" I whispered when Javier had calmed down a little. "I don't know. I'm free of them now, but it's not certain. In this business, you can never be 100% sure. I'm afraid it's still not safe for me." I squeezed his hand in anguish. "I don't mind. Life without you makes no sense." Javier ran his hand through my hair, thoughtful. "Are you sure?" I nodded. Javier sighed, pulling me closer and stroking my hair tenderly. Then he kissed me, started the car, and we set off on our journey. From that moment on, we were never apart.